Hey, this is my first video post for inalienableife.tumblr.com, and it's for my US government class, and I will be talking about something I got out of Unit 2. So without further ado, let's get started. So, reading through my textbook, I read probably the most infamous example of the United States government beating around the bush: slavery. I found Foley in the entire process, a series of compromises that just barely kept the scales from teetering out of balance. It was kind of like when you have two little kids fighting over a toy, and then the parent finally separates them and gives them both just enough of what they want without actually resolving the problem. So then you end up finding them an hour later, fighting over the same exact thing. I think that definitely happened to me as a child. So now there are a lot of issues that appear to be avoided in our modern political context. But one common theme I see in the United States from my perspective, it seems that we tend to avoid conversations surrounding race in general. Now, I don't know if that previous statement was simply a regurgitation of the words the media has pumped through me, but this certainly seems like it could be the case. Let's look at some personal examples. I come from a Latino Caucasian background. I grew up in South Florida with my Cuban grandparents as my secondary caretakers. Cuban culture and ways do not stray from what I consider to be my identity. Yet, I get comments at school like, but you aren't actually Latina. You're actually white. Or Anna, don't kid yourself. You're white. Not only do these comments bring to light commonly accepted stereotypes of what it means to be Latina and Caucasian, but they expose a reluctance for actual conversation on various cultural identities. If someone can dismiss me as white, there's no need for actual conversation. There's no challenge to their preconceived notion as to how they imagine Latinos to be. Now, this dynamic translates onto a national platform as well. We see the media's blatant disregard to discuss these very same problems when they arise. The coverage of President Obama's two campaigns were very limited in coverage pertaining to expansion on cultural dialogue. I remember staring blankly at the television monitor, a malleable middle schooler, and watching the news networks cover cliche stories like, what does this mean for America now that we have an African American president? As well as feeding stories that contributed to a sense of self-righteousness and affirmation for the ability to elect an African American president. Now, there's no doubt that President Obama's election represented the culmination of many years of bitter struggle and hard work for a stronger America. But the problem is not gone. Even on the Zimmerman trial, there appeared to be an eerie disregard for rules of race. Alright, so going back to Gov. Throughout my government course, I managed to learn many things about the circumstances in which our Constitution was formed. Colonial America saw a vast range of diversity, that proved to be unprecedented anywhere in the world at the time. Despite the challenges that came with this, the framers managed to sculpt a government that took into account the various interests. After studying, the idea occurred to me that maybe one of these reasons we struggle with discussion like this as a country is because our structure of government takes care of these digressing interests for us. In the past, these discussions did not occur because Americans were used to the government taking care of these dilemmas. And when the government cannot obtain the authority or power to execute this duty, we get conflict like the Civil War. The Civil War was just as much a war for the federal government's authority over the southern states as it was for abolition. So although we may draw various parallels from the pre-Civil War to what our country experiences now, what has actually changed in our current modern circumstance that has created this stigma surrounding racial dialogue? Well, an idea I thought about was maybe it's just not being regulated as much. Now, I cannot say for sure, but we look at some undisputable changes since then. Technology has become the tool by which the masses exercise their voices and personal opinions. Maybe technology, through globalization and increased discussion in general, has simply facilitated the extension of our opinions. Many boundaries of communication no longer exist. The forming connections at an the forming of connections at an exponential rate. It is possible that this triggered a dramatic shift in how publicizing a private opinion can become truly a public dilemma. In class, we have discussed how suddenly our private opinions have shifted from private to public, but by which they take on a new active role. It is this shift that I think, has caused the hush word on conversation. It is possible many realize we no longer live in a time where our words don't have any consequences. When you put this idea in the context of the pre-Civil War circumstances, it suddenly resonates a lot stronger. During the Civil War, there was an experiment in direct democracy which led to Bleeding Kansas. The direct democracy gave everyone a chance to vote and have a true voice in large issues through the government. This bypassed a lot of regulation and led to conflict. It is possible that technology is one way of bypassing government regulation now. Of course, we have always been able to say what's on our mind, but technology could serve as the mechanism that allows for the shift of opinions from private to public. It is possible that this direct democracy served as a similar mechanism back then during the pre-Civil War period. This concept becomes increasingly interesting to explore, especially when we have a lot of talk surrounding new media outlets as further extensions of the democratic process. Now, before I go, it's important to note that these are simply ideas of mine. I am simply a thinker. If you ever want to know what's truly going on, make sure you contact someone, consult a book, a teacher, or professor. But I hope you enjoy what I got out of the reading, and I'll see you next unit.